Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, the national security podcast that gives you a competitive advantage, an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world, looking for patterns and early warning signs, and asking how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's February 9th, 2026. Let's get to it. Hey, Sue. How are you?
Cold. I'm on location from my big brother's house in Northern Virginia, and holy smokes. I mean, we had a cold snap in Texas.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to get warm for 2 days. I mean, so have I turned into a Texan with thin blood or, or is it really cold here? But it's cold.
Yeah, you might need to come back. We touched near 80s a couple days
Oh my
ago.
God, that sounds so good. Anyway, so I'm cold. How about you?
Good. Like I said, it's warming up here. It's rather pleasant, not to gloat too much to those elsewhere around the country. Big game last night. What'd you think about the Super Bowl?
I'm really happy for Sam Darnold, and I think I was gonna be happy with either team winning, kind of a feel-good story, and you say, "Well, how can the Patriots be a feel-good story?" But on the other hand, it's like they had a chance to prove that it wasn't just Belichick and Brady that made them relevant, so I thought that was
Right.
good. I do think the game itself felt a little bit like 2 Midland teams without all the energy that they had from their Cinderella story, who were kind of proving both their strengths, defense, and their weaknesses, some of the things, but it was an entertaining game, and I gotta tell you, I liked the halftime. Maybe I just like the idea of salsa and dance music and whether it's in Spanish or not. Plus, I know people that have gone to the Bad Bunny concerts, and that actually felt a little bit like what they said it was like. So, all in all, not a riveting watch, but a good watch. How about you?
Yeah. Yeah. Bad Bunny was enjoyed in our house. The kids were dancing and loving it. The little bit that they saw. Our oldest did do some translation. He's picked up Spanish pretty well, so he helped out with a little bit of translation. I couldn't understand
Me
hardly any
neither.
of it. But I get it, right? The NFL has 9 international games planned next year. Cowboys are playing down in Rio de Janeiro. There's a game in France. So international expansion is huge. And so why wouldn't you bring in one of the most popular international artists in the world? So
I love
totally
it, and
get
I
it.
thought it was fun, and I thought it was fun.
Yep. Game itself, kind of a defensive battle, which I think we probably should have expected. It wasn't as exciting of a greatest show on turf or air it out West Coast offense, but defense wins championships. And from what I could see, I didn't get to watch all of it because, again, children
Yeah.
were, why are you abandoning me and not playing Legos? Got that a lot. So I didn't see it soup to nuts, but from what I did see, it did seem like a lot of AI commercials this year.
Well, one, I think as I said, every commercial had an AI component. There was not much defense. That is true.
Yeah.
So I think you win that prediction hands down. That just on the defense and the Sam Darnold story, I think what he did do is did he end without a turnover?
Yeah, he did not have a turnover.
Yeah. So
Possibly
you
the
know
whole
some
postseason, I think.
right. So sometimes you just your job is to just do a solid job at your position. So yeah, it was good. So,
Yep. I will
onward.
say of the commercials I did see, I did get an impression of, mm, there weren't as many that were like super edgy. There were some really wholesome ones. Obviously, Anheuser-Busch and the Clydesdales are going to be wholesome. But there was the Lay's potato farmer. I don't know if you saw that one.
I didn't.
That was a pretty good one about a father, a generational farming, passing down the farm from father to daughter. And it's kind of the vibe across the board. There's certainly some silly ones, but nothing that like, I don't know, pushing the social boundary as much as it was like kind of the wholesome theme, which is interesting given our climate.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. I like it. I love, me. I'm all about America and schmaltz and family and and good feeling. I think it's a great sign that people think that's what we're longing for. That sort of remembering who we are, and whether that's that turns into why some people protest or turns into why some people, you know, support other things. I would say the other category I noticed was, just things I didn't get. Like like, we were starting the middle of some stories about companies that I'd never heard of, and because I'd heard of it, I didn't understand the point. So, I think I had one more feeling as I watched some of those commercials is, "Oh my gosh, Sue, they are not targeting the 67-year-old widow demographic."
Mm. You're
Yeah,
not
no.
the customer profile. Yeah,
I
not the target demographic
I think that's kinda what I get.
for Poppy. Poppy
Yeah.
wasn't pushing that agenda on you. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't mind it, but I did feel like, "Golly, when did I become, like, outside the targeted zone?"
Mhm.
Just relevance. Hey, just leading into you taking us off on this episode,
Yeah.
just continuing our theme of trying to not just have interesting stories that we hopefully can put in context for you, but try and talk a little bit about what we think these stories mean in aggregate and the signals and the precedents we think are being set. Today, I think we're going to talk about cybersecurity and elections and foreign policy a bit. And there is a pattern that's emerging that we've talked about before, which is when trust is no longer institutionalized, we improvise it. And when legitimacy is no longer settled, then it's performed. And when neither is renewed, risk quietly accumulates. And so I think this isn't really a crisis episode, it's a bit of a signal episode. And I think we hope that you'll hear over the course of the episode expiring agreements and personal interventions and ad hoc diplomacy are early indicators of institutional strain, not just isolated events. So I think it might feel like a bit of unrelated things, but as you listen, listen for those signals because I think they're there.
All right. Well, let's get to it. So we'll start with CISA, as you discussed. CISA 2015 expired on September 30th, 2025, after Congress failed to reauthorize it before the end of its statutory period. Renewal efforts have been tied to broader federal funding negotiations, including continuing resolutions, and Congress most recently renewed it, the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, extending it through September 30th of this year, 2026, in the spending bill that was signed on February 3rd. The extension matters because many of the companies rely on CISA 2015 to share cyber threat information with the government under strong liability and legal protections. But the bigger story here is this instability. We've seen this going back and forth with all the continuing resolutions and the two government shutdowns we've had so far. This churn makes it hard for companies to plan long-term information sharing programs or invest in partnerships that depend on the statute. So even with the renewal, organizations are being pushed to identify backup legal bases and revisit information sharing agreements
Yeah.
in case those protections disappear again. So you can talk a little bit about what CISA 2015 means to both the government and these private companies, and how does this impact trust with this whipsaw or inconsistency going back and forth?
Yeah, well, uh, different from sometimes I'm going to kind of end with a wrap up and just talk a little bit about what we thought we were doing in 2014 and 2015 with it. It really was kind of the first real legislation of the digital era. You know, we come out of the counterterrorism era and we go now into this real information age. And cybersecurity incidents have been going on for a while. We hadn't really dealt with them. And one thing became super apparent was that the threat surface was well beyond government control. And so the government just being able to see what it saw about what was happening was never going to be enough. And not only did companies themselves have a lot of threat information, but they were also the ones being attacked. And so how do we bring those two things together? So actually this act was really about creating a framework for sharing that accounted for liability and privilege protections that allow that sharing to happen, right? Companies were loath to share information about cybersecurity events. Number one, for shareholders, would they lose trust? Or number two, would by sharing it, would they open themselves up to litigation about not having done things? And so this was a framework that allowed that to happen. And so take that and say, well, what happens if it isn't continued to be codified? Go for it. And more than importantly, isn't established as a really important pillar of national security burden that is shared between the government and the private sector.
Hmm.
Um, you're just going to see an erosion in information, willingness to share information. There could easily be practical consequences for private and public sectors because part of the tension between government and industry sharing is the private sector needed more and more from the federal government, and so there was pressure on the government to share, not just stand back and say, "We'll tell you what we think you need to hear," but they're like,
Yeah.
"If we're gonna be responsible for this, we need to hear more." So, it's funny, the lack of enforced tension actually could make it work. And then the other thing is you're gonna start seeing alternative agreements being made, and you already have some of these conversations going on is should companies be allowed to conduct offensive cyber operations to protect themselves? Right? And is that a good thing? Do they have the visibility that they have?
Is that a good thing?
Um, boy, uh, defense is best done proactively by the people that see it first, and they're the ones that are seeing it first. They have the
Right.
best detection system. On the other hand, one of the problems that there's always been with cyber operations is the coupling effects, and you can't always see what those are gonna be.
Yeah.
And so the idea of taking action, you and I talk about this all the time, second and third order effects, taking
Right.
action without an understanding. And again, if you don't have a shared foundational understanding, even if you're allowing someone to take independent action, the likelihood that that action drifts from shared goal increases. And
Yeah.
and I just think you start having some economic and security implications because in these agreements, it's not just the big companies who actually have the wherewithal to be able to get information and integrate it on threat. Now you have small and medium-sized businesses that aren't getting the same sorts of things. So remembering what we've talked about is every node is either target or transportation. So if you start having small and medium businesses that again are distant from the same threat information, our overall system gets weaker, even if the big guys can protect themselves. So my wrap up comment is ever since 2016 and Russian attempts to influence our election
Hmm.
and the coupling of that to this idea of a Russia hoax, it feels to me like cybersecurity has become a victim of that. And if this is just legislators, my word, sloth, in not reauthorizing it, then I think then we ought to get on with it. If there is an interest in it because somehow it has become a partisan issue, as though CISA itself had some partisan play,
Hmm.
then I think it's really troubling. Um, Because cybersecurity is so foundational, and just because we're not hearing about the big cybersecurity attacks doesn't mean there's not the vulnerability there that there's always been, and this is just one piece of eroding that if it's left unattended to.
Well, I think it's partly a victim of just the whole
Yeah.
ineffectualness of Congress and passing bills and balancing budgets and things like that. But I also think it's just not shiny, right? Like it's much more fun to talk about a defense spending bill and the Defense Department and those kind of understated things that you can't really touch, right? You can touch a tank, you can touch an airplane, you can see it. It's not as fun or exciting to talk about cybersecurity, but sharing information is extremely critical because of what you said before. You don't identify those big trends or part of a bigger operation if you're just an individual company thinking that you're isolated within this potential attack.
If I forget at the end of the episode, remind me to come back to this because I think your point about not shiny is really good. But the fact that this isn't considered shiny in a world where we are
Mhm.
really struggling to govern in this environment that is operating at digital speed and is much more consequently affected by information than it is by tanks and planes,
Hmm.
notwithstanding what we see, is problematic, I think, and is in fact one of the things that we're as a nation gonna have to address is we have to embrace the differences of this environment to past environments and the importance of different modalities to ensure the same security and freedoms and freedom of motion that we've always had.
Well, let's move on to the DNI went down to Georgia.
Please tell me you're gonna add some music.
Little, I don't know if I've got any knockoff Charlie Daniels in our
Yeah,
sound subscription, so we'll
I
see.
don't know. Yeah.
But the Director of National Intelligence doesn't typically attend domestic FBI raids. Her statutory role is foreign intelligence. But last week, DNI Tulsi Gabbard was on site when FBI agents seized some 700 boxes of election materials from Fulton County, Georgia, and then connected President Trump by phone for a, quote, pep talk with the agents. Sue, can you tell us a little bit more about the responsibilities of the ODNI, those specified and implied, and why her going down there was weird?
Um, yeah, it's worse than weird. It it wa it was in fact weird. Um, it was wrong. So let's be a little concrete just just for a second and say that the DNI has 0, count them 0, domestic authorities. All the authorities of the DNI are foreign authorities. So, though intelligence absolutely has the ability to integrate information from domestic sources and from domestic operations, absolutely can share its own intelligence in support of that operations. The sh She has no authority there, period. Now and I you know me, I'm an intelligence purist, and I'm really
Hmm.
big about not mixing the streams. This really has a bad feel to it in terms of and again, this is a little nerdy, but intelligence is inductive. It looks at what is, and then it tries to understand it, and law enforcement is deductive, is it's trying to prove something to be true. If you start having the DNI involved in proving that something is true, you have now corrupted the independent voice that intelligence provides. It is a version of intelligence now having influence on policy in ways that you don't want it to. So again, kind of in the nerdy thing, I don't like it either because you're mixing the streams. And then let's say we want to give it the best possible thing that says, hey, listen, you have no idea what evidence they scooped up. Maybe within that data there is forensic evidence of some sort of foreign influence or foreign operations or foreign hand in something.
Yep.
Like no one has seen it. Remember, we've adjudicated this, but let's say that. Well, if that's true, that is she knows nothing of that. What is the DNI gonna do in terms of looking down and say, "Oh, forensically, I can see that signature block looks like something." It's just not her job. You would have intelligence officers detailed to the FBI for the purpose of that operation. So I don't like it. I don't like the signal that it provides. I don't like the mixing of the streams that it suggests, and and I think you're trying to borrow legitimacy to try and convince people that what looks like a weird act is not by putting this person in and going to the people that originally thought and
Hmm.
assessed that there was foreign influence operations. So it feels performative at best, weird for sure, and problematic at worst. No, 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 no. I can't
Yeah.
think of any reason. And it's not that the FBI and the intelligence community don't coordinate.
Say,
Absolutely.
doesn't FBI fall under the ODNI?
No, it does not. The National Security Unit of gets funding from and participates in, but remember the DNI does not have operational control over any organization with the
Right.
exception of the ODNI. So, no, good question. No.
Yeah, because it is one of the 18 organizations of the ODNI, but
Yeah, but
not
it isn't the whole
operational control.
FBI. It is the national security element of it, and
Yep.
even that has independence to it. It just derives so much of its funding from the intelligence community budget, and it is included post 9/11
Mm,
for the purpose of being able to share information legitimately, not for the purpose of controlling operations.
yep.
Yep.
So I think important distinction there. I also think that this is less about 2020 and more about future elections. We talked about in episode 27, democracy is a system that survives only because those who want power agree before the votes are cast to accept the
Yes.
result. But President Trump cited, quote, international cheating as a justification for them going down there and looking into this election. And since then has called for Republicans to, quote, nationalize elections and suggested the federal government should take over voting in states he considers, quote, crooked. Judges have already ruled that the president doesn't have a role in elections, and the Constitution assigns no role at all to the president. If voters start to believe the federal government is using its power to contest results rather than protect them, what happens to that infrastructure? And do you think it's recoverable? This may just be a tease for a future episode.
Yeah, let's do a future episode on this. Number 1, wait. So now we have foreign interference and influence in our elections? Weird. I thought that was all a hoax. Number 1. 2, it may turn out in any election that the people of any state vote more Democratic or more Republican. But the states themselves are not red or blue. And this idea to suggest that just because the way people have decided to vote in one election, that means that you can decide that that state or that people or that government is illegitimate and should be controlled at the federal level is so breathtaking antithetical to our values that I don't know why people are allowing this conversation to be held. Remember when we talked gerrymandering? And
Hmm.
yes, I think it's really problematic, but remember, that's predictively how it votes with the set of people and their interests. Always the power is with the vote itself. And so this idea of taking a group of people just on the way they voted and deciding that they are illegitimate and need to be controlled and can't be trusted is a breathtaking statement, and I think we need to call it out for what it is, and it's why our founders didn't give this authority at the presidential level. But
Yeah.
other than that, I think it's just fine.
Yeah, it's offensive to our intelligence, right? To just be like, well, you're definitely going to vote this way in this district. And one of the things that bothers me the most walking out of polling stations or around polling stations when people say, vote red or vote blue. Like, all right, at least in Texas, you can only vote in one primary, right? You
Right.
either have to choose Democratic or Republican, but in the final election, you get to choose. And yeah, maybe you skew one side or the other depending on the issues, but choose the candidate individually. Don't be a sheep. Just maybe you're
No,
mostly red, maybe you're blue, but it just look at the individuals because just because you agree with the candidate for president of the United States doesn't mean you align with the same school board representative that is really going to impact you the most locally, because that's where most of your taxes come from, is the schools and the school board. It doesn't mean that that same party candidate is going to be most aligned with your values.
yeah, love that, Eric. Or maybe that should be yours and my motto. No sheeple.
That's
You
right.
know, use your voice. And I can't believe you brought that up about your reaction to the red or blue. I I hate walking into a polling place and say, which ballot do you want? Do you want Do you want the cheat sheet for Republican or cheat sheet for Democrat? No. I want the integrated cheat sheet so that I can decide the individuals upon whom I wanna vote. And just in general, this idea of going straight party line voting, including in Congress where you had these, unanimous votes based on party, I just think we have drifted so far away from
Yeah.
our individual responsibility to think independently and our governance responsibility to remember that votes are just aggregates of individuals and don't start treating them as groups. Love it.
Yeah. Don't want to dissuade anyone from voting at all if you don't know all your candidates. I would say get out there and vote if you can. And if you don't feel comfortable in knowledge of a candidate, then just don't vote in that line, right? Vote
Totally.
on the ones that you feel comfortable with.
Perfect advice.
Let's get on down to Cuba. So we talked about this a little bit last week with Cuba potentially running out of oil reserves and they're tight on their energy. And also Secretary Rubio discussing how the United States would prefer a regime change in Cuba. And so it got us thinking, what has been going on at Cuba? So, if we jump back to July of 2015, President Obama formally announced the U.S. decision to reestablish diplomatic relations and the embassies reopened. Travel began, and Obama actually visited Havana. But then it cooled off a little bit in 2017 under the first Trump administration. And starting around 2021, Cuba started going through some economic strain and then big protest era. Leadership was blaming sanctions and an embargo and external pressures. And some of this internal legitimacy stress became more visible. In the last 2 years, the energy crunch became more of an organization problem. They've got blackouts, transport disruption, inflation, and Cuba is hunting for fuel suppliers amid U.S. pressure, particularly from the removal of Maduro in Venezuela. Fidel Castro, the longtime revolutionary and leader of Cuba, he died in 2016. His brother Raul took over for a long time, but then was succeeded by Miguel Diaz-Canel as president in 2018, and then as first secretary in April of 2021. That's the real party leader, the real head honcho in these
Yeah.
communist systems. But Russia is an interesting twist and very tied into Cuba, their longstanding history. You may remember the Bay of Pigs back in April of 1961. And then after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, that kind of fell out of communication or operations for a while. But in 2014, relations were revived in a big way. Russia wrote off 90% of Cuba's Soviet era debt, often cited to be around $35 billion, and then expanded cooperation. In July of 2014, President Putin, alongside Raul Castro, explicitly emphasized valuing the relationship, saying, "We are proud of our rich experience of Russia Cuba cooperation, and we value the spirit of sincere friendship and rapport in our relations." In May of last year, Reuters reported Russia promising to invest over $1 billion in Cuba by 2030. So, with all this said, what do you think Russia values so much about this relationship with Cuba? Nostalgia, regional presence, other?
So we'll get back to the topic of kind of transactional legitimacy because I do think we're seeing some of that, right? And some of that comes with just an increasingly economic world, right? Where
Hmm.
people are pricing in relationships in terms of what they need. And it is a big help that Cuba is having its own struggles with internal legitimacy. So no, it has to get some of its legitimacy by these same deals. What
Yep.
is Russia? I think it's all of the above. I think for the same reason, I can't believe I'm going to say this, and I'm thinking about people like Beth Sanner and some of my really close friends that were, and Shelby Pearson and some really amazing analysts on Russia. But if you think what we fought over in the Cuban Missile Crisis, this
Hmm.
was really about Russia establishing itself a presence here in our hemisphere. Um, and so I think there's a piece of it gives them presence here, and I think it is as unlikely to easily give up a foothold or a beachhead as it is unlikely, as evidenced by recent U.S. actions, that we are going to be willing to give way to Russia and China establishing their foothold in the global south and in our hemisphere. So I think there is a piece of just straight up geopolitics. And for Russia, it is establishing a friend and a base outside of their mainland and inside ours that is important. I think the I think we can't underestimate Venezuelan oil and
Hmm.
energy and how problematic it is, at least in the short haul, what we've done in Venezuela and what certainly the burden on Cuba because of the loss of that easy thing, but it spreads out. So I think what you're seeing is in Russia's interest, both historic. I would say historic, not necessarily nostalgic, because I think that is too romantic a notion. I think this is about presence
Yeah.
and influence. And while the US historically has had so many friends that we have been able to have global presence in a cooperative basis, the places where Russia has had global presence in a real meaningful way is many fewer, and this is one of those. But I also think this is a lot about energy and economics, and it's not just Russia, but you're also seeing Mexico and Nicaragua kind of getting into the fray in terms of reestablishing or pricing in their relationships with Cuba as well. So I think it's almost become a for Cuba, it's a real issue,
Hmm.
but it's also a microcosm, not just of geopolitics, but just what's happening when economic forces and legitimacy becomes based on the deal you can get rather than the long-term alliances that you have. And we could go into a whole talk about, is this where the US is going too? Where I
Sure.
would opine, as I have in the past, that our strength has been those long-standing friendships that we've counted on, and we have, or we seem to be on the way to reducing them to a bunch of economic relationships. And so is this a little microcosm that's almost a case study
Right.
of what, is a growing global trend, including for superpowers.
Yeah, Cuba was very closely aligned with the Maduro regime.
Yep.
32 Cubans are reported having been killed in the extraction of Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela, and there was reports of a big homecoming where Raul Castro, 94-year-old Raul Castro, stood alongside President Diaz-Canel as they returned those remains to Cuba and 2 days of mourning. So some of those intelligence services, some of those folks were reportedly security for President Maduro. And then one of the things that could be getting tighter and bringing Russia closer in to Cuba again is last week, the US and India reportedly agreed to a trade framework that includes India agreeing to halt direct and indirect purchases of Russian oil. And Reuters describes Indian refiners significantly reducing Russian purchases. This reduction in the US reciprocal tariff from 25% down to 18 appears to cede at least partly, but this India trade framework reduces Russian oil demand. Russia hunts for leverage markets out there. Does this make Cuba even more important to them from an oil perspective?
I think it makes the global South more, and certainly South America more interesting
True.
to them writ large. I think you said it well. I don't think we really talked about India's importance to everybody geopolitically and kind of how Modi plays that relationship, and you just see the tussling back and forth.
Yep.
I can say, though, that it feels like everything is instantaneous value and impact versus what do I need to build? I don't see any great sense. So yes, I think Russia's gonna have to do something to continue to strengthen its energy dominance. It
Mhm.
does go back to one of the reasons why Ukraine is really interesting to them. But I think just it's an even greater expansion of this issue of there are all sorts of levers anyone can pull, and every action creates a reaction. But I do wonder what the tethering to stability is going to be. But does what happened in India matter? Yes. Now, what's interesting to me, I think the next question is what's Russia's next play with the US?
Mhm.
I think you have to say that in the last, certainly in the Trump administrations, Russia has been able to exert pressure on the US to not be as punitive with them as some of our rhetoric has been. And so if they aren't able to either find a black market way into Venezuela or to get themselves some standing and strengthening of Cuba's positioning. I think it'll be interesting to see how they come back to the US to get us to relieve some of the pressure that we're putting on them.
Yeah. Damn commies.
Exactly so.
Another Red Scare. All right. So what do you want folks to take away from this episode?
I think I've said it too many times, but I'm just gonna say it again. This trust thing matters.
Mhm.
And and for lots of reasons, not just for the US, but kind of globally, there is pressure internally in so many countries. I think I mentioned, I think it's increasingly difficult for governments to kind of corral the power and will of the people in a meaningful way to either, if you're democratic, to have your actions being shaped by their interests. I think that's just getting harder. I
Yep.
and it's like the institutions that we have built, the world have built over the past decades are just insufficient for the world in which we find ourselves, and you see increasing pressure to put your thumb on the scale to create outcome without necessarily worrying about creating a new system, and I think we're seeing a lot of that pressure. So just this issue of trust, and you can use the rhetoric of historic trust, but it is really hard to maintain if it's not there. So I think we're seeing that. To this transactional thing, this this uh, I have to deal with the economic pressures I have. And there are real economic pressures. And because the system of trade seems to be faltering, people are going to get their own. And then that's going to come down to the powerful. What was that quotation you have? The 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 powerful will get what they can. Right? So I think you're
Yeah,
going to
the weak
see.
suffer what they must.
Yeah. And so I
Mm.
think what you're gonna see in this world where legitimacy of the existing system and trust in sane is eroding at the exact same time we have not yet put in a new system that is more relevant to the speed and realities of this world. I think you're just gonna see more tension, more whipsaw, and more of the powerful exerting their will because they can. So that's number 2. And number 3 is I think Americans are feeling every day that in the information space, as a manifestation of systemic trust, people only believe what they're already predisposed to believe. And it it may feel like people are strengthening their positions in their belief, but what mostly it's saying is, I don't believe in anything anymore. And I don't know how you get that back when we're most going to need it. So these signals that we're seeing, and these are 3 cases that I don't think prior to this episode we would have put on the forefront of the trust issue.
Mhm.
But I think if you look at each of them, the way they're manifesting is because the systems that used to govern interactions are no longer sufficient to do that. So we're either propping them up through performance or we're covering for them through transactions. And I don't know that that's a good long-term plan. So I think that's kind of my big takeaways from this episode.
Yeah.
And CISA and cyber are important, so don't neglect it just because you're not seeing it on the front page every day. It is the most powerful force of disruption in this world.
Yeah. Just because you don't see it in action every day, but
Right,
you see your phone every day. We're on a computer, we're listening to a podcast, like, cyber ties into all this,
right. It
right?
does.
Yeah. What else you watching?
Okay, so, a moment of personal privilege, my friend. I'm gonna
I can always cut it out, yeah,
yeah.
if I don't like it.
Thanks, Aaron. Um, I I'm unhappy, with just what's going on from a leadership perspective right now in America. And I think part of this is, and I've said it before, this comes from someone who devoted her life to serving fellow Americans and spending most of it as a leader and feeling that responsibility of leadership. So I don't like what's going on right now. So here's what I'm going to say. The meme that came out last week on President Trump's Truth Social account is abhorrent and has no place in polite society. From a leadership perspective, here's what we all know to be true. Every leader of any organization is responsible for everything that does or does not happen on their watch and in their organization. That means I don't care whether it was a staffer, someone who came in from the street. A leader is responsible for everything that does or doesn't happen. And that is true whether it's just a 1-second offensive clip or whether it is the actions of an institution or whether it is an economy that is non-performant. The truth is, no matter what happened before or what will happen after, you're responsible for everything that does or doesn't happen. So that's just true. And you have to hold leaders accountable. Otherwise, things don't work. So that's one. Number two is the president of the United States has no power other than that which is derived from being the elected representative of the people. And that means every single thing a president does is because the people grant the power and does so in the name of the people. There isn't anything else. No one cares about any individual. And again, Eric, I don't care what their name is, who holds an office. The power is because they represent America. And you see this over and over again. It's why people are still dealing with us. No matter what they think, you see world leaders being very hesitant to have any opinion about an individual leader because they would say he is the elected representative of the United States. And the United States is an important player to them. So everything a president does is being done based on the power of the American people and is done in their name. And then the last thing is I have known for years there are a lot of people that comfort themselves if whoever wins any election, they say, well, that's not my X, not my senator, not my congressman, not my president. Nope. It doesn't work that way. You and I have talked about the bargain of a democracy is we hold elections, someone wins and someone loses, and that person is granted the power and authority. And that means that our elected president is, in fact, our president. And it is problematic when one of the candidates decides that they want legitimacy to be conditional on whether they win or whether they lose. It is equally problematic if the citizenry, when faced with a choice they may or may not prefer, decides to absolve themselves of responsibility by saying they're not mine. No, no, no. This is where our strength of our system comes from, is that we don't get to absolve ourselves, either the person that wins or the citizenry, from the selection we've made. So I think that our system is in the process of breaking, in part because the actions of some of our leaders and in part because the world has changed so much that what we designed years ago is just not keeping up. But we will not be able to rebuild what it is we want if everybody doesn't believe that this is our responsibility to participate. I believe in us, but only if we feel the weight of the responsibility that came with the privilege of the choices we make. Especially true for the leaders because they are graced with leadership, which is such an honor. But it is also true of the everyday citizens. I love that there are signs that the Americans are saying we have an opinion, but exercise that opinion with the actions you decide to take in order for us to build what it is that we must have.
Yep. If you don't like it, put one foot on the pedal, one foot on the ground, and get the hell out of here.
Well, that probably wasn't where I was going, but this is ours. We have places we need to go. Let's believe in how we must go.
Yep. I am also watching Ukraine-Russia peace deal, reportedly
Yep.
looking for that by June. President Zelensky said that's what the White House's goal is. Haven't talked about them in a little while, and I think this Indian oil purchasing is going to be a bigger deal. And then I'm also watching some half pipe and some snowboarding this week. Enjoying
Oh,
a little bit more Winter Olympics while we've got it.
I I love curling. I don't know why.
I saw something that's going to be the new pickleball. I don't buy that,
Okay,
but
okay. So that now I'm depressed because I don't know. I think pickleball is a little hipster, but maybe that's because again, I'm not the demographic that's going to be playing it. But I do love Olympics time. I do. It's amazing. And you see all these sports that, at least for me, I typically don't play, and I'm just in awe of the athletes and what they're
aren't you
able
the
to do.
perfect pickleball demographic? Like you're the design pickleball demographic?
I don't know. I feel like it's for the people right outside their prime athletic years to be able to have organized competitions. And when like, is
Yeah,
pickleball the
that's
new
like your
racquetball?
early 20-year-olds then.
Yeah,
Outside your
that's what
prime athletic years.
I was thinking 34-year-olds thinking about who I was, but maybe, but I do love me some Olympics. I was brokenhearted, that Lindsey Vonn fell. Um, on the other hand, I do like people who do what is imprudent because they must do it to be who they are. I do. I
That's her
do honor
style.
her.
She went out
I do.
riding the way she always has,
I
right?
do. All right, my friend. Should we let our listeners go?
Yeah, I think so. Because that's what we're watching and how we see it. Thank you for joining us, and no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people.
Well, thanks for joining us as well. We'd love to hear what you think. Both of our direction, focus, and insights is the conversation we want even more than your adulation. Join us next week, as we hope you always do, for the Understandable Insights podcast, wherever you listen. And as always, especially now, go forth, do good, and for goodness sakes, be kind to one another.